Thank you. And I'm the person going last just before the lunch break, right? So,
well set up in terms of time. You're good.
thank you so much. These are my disclosures, and these mainly relate to the fact that for the past decade or so, I've been working in the space of treatment-resistant depression, developing new treatments, and for about 2.5 years now, I got involved with the NIDA's Clinical Trials Network. So whatever I'm going to talk about, I do not represent NIDA's Clinical Trial Network, and I'm not going to present any data specifically from that. So what's NIDA's Clinical Trials Network? This was a learning opportunity for me. This is a broad network, and this map can evolve. Because there is a council meeting, I think, happening in September when the new network nodes may get decided. But it's broad, and it really is a remarkable infrastructure for doing large-scale clinical trials, multi-site clinical trials. Colleen and I were involved in one of those. So this is just from their website, what all different studies that are available there for people with stimulant use disorders, so cocaine or methamphetamine use disorder. Again, a lot more trials done in the space of opioid use disorder, but just covering the ground in terms of all the different studies that have been involved. So when Hamid asked me to talk about outcome measures, that's such a broad topic. I wanted to focus on stimulant use disorders, so cocaine or methamphetamine use disorder, and use this as a way that I learned in the past 2.5 years to think about it, and how, as we are starting a new study next month, how we're really thinking about outcome measures within the context of a clinical trial that is being done in NIDA's Clinical Trials Network. So this link here, if you go to it, it will take you to the list of all the assessments that NIDA's, the CTN has available. And if you just search with substance use and drugs, these are all the different measures that have been used. And again, this just reflects the heterogeneity of the illness, the different investigators, what is the preference of the study, what is the course of illness in which it is being studied. So those are the many different measures that are available. So my mentor, Madhukar Trivedi, his first study in this network was the study of exercise for people with cocaine or methamphetamine use disorder. So it's, if you can see, and probably not in the very back, the primary outcome measure was looking at timeline follow-back. So asking people, and it was done repeatedly early on, less frequently later on. But this study did have urine drug screen. So the primary outcome had actually this Alcon algorithm that was substituting whatever the self-report was based on whatever the urine drug screen was. So fairly complicated, but trying to get to more of like a ground truth to as what this person's, if they missed visit, it imputed it as positive. But there were some other measures like stimulant craving questionnaires, etc. So this was sort of like the first study. The next study that Dr. Trivedi led in this space was the study that looked at injectable naltrexone plus oral sustained release bupropion. So it was the combination of this in individuals with methamphetamine use disorder. This was a complicated study design. It was sequential parallel comparison design where the investigators who were running the study didn't know, the participants didn't know, but the lead team knew that there were 2 stages in the study of 6 weeks long, and so that's why it was kind of a complicated study design. But during weeks 5 and 6, during the last 2 weeks of that study, people had to come in for 2 visits a week, so there were 4 in-person visits. And during these 4 in-person visits, urine samples were collected. And if 3 out of those 4 urine samples were negative, it was deemed as a response. If someone missed a visit, then it was okay. If they missed 2 visits, it was assumed as positive, and so they were deemed as non-responder. But there were a lot of other secondary outcomes also, because when we run these clinical trials, we don't measure just one thing, we measure a lot of different things. So just the primary outcome, right? So the primary outcome, if we look at the number of response, there was 16.5% response rate in stage 1 and 11.4% response rate in stage 2. And because it was the SPCD design, there was a cumulated weighted difference calculated. But this was a massive difference, 11.5% point difference. So number needed to treat below 10 of this injectable naltrexone oral bupropion. Now, the DTMC is now running a phase 3 type study where we are trying to replicate these findings. We just started recruitment for that study this month. But there were other things like secondary outcomes, like methamphetamine negative urine samples. We talked about depression often being comorbid, so we saw that there was a reduction. Again, it was not statistically interpretable because it was not a priori mentioned in the protocol, but we see that the confidence interval is minus 0.2, so there was a reduction in depression severity, as well as on measures of quality of life, there was improvement. So again, one way to think about it. Then moving on to one of the studies that Colleen and I have been involved in. The study, the database lock is next month, so hopefully we'll find out what the outcomes were. But this was a pilot study. Think about that, a pilot study that was supposed to randomize 160 people. So, but the key idea, and Hamid, you brought up, was the safety-related issue. So if people are actively using methamphetamine or cocaine, and if they gave them a course of TMS, are we going to see seizures? So that's why it was. And then the other idea was that if they're actively using, are they going to actually show up for the visits, right? So the visits that we have lined up. So the primary outcome here was that, right? So percentage of people, participants, who will receive at least 20 sessions of either TMS or sham. So just think about that as terms of primary outcome. It's definitely not a primary outcome that will get you FDA cleared for a device, but that this is the primary outcome that the study really needed to really make a difference to the field so that tomorrow or at some point the clinical trials network may do a much larger study to really test the efficacy. So another study that we are doing, building up on the success of the ADAPT-2 trial, is the study of injectable naltrexone and injectable buprenorphine. So here, actually, we are looking at urine drug screens. So the study is about halfway done recruiting. So there, our primary outcome is more conventional based on, but it's not the ADAPT-2 3 out of 4 negative, but it's what percentage of urine samples during weeks 5 to 8 are negative for cocaine during that time. Again, visits are twice a week. But there are a lot of other different samples. So I want to take a deeper dive in this one study that we are going to start next month, again, funded through NIDA's Clinical Trials Network. It's a study, it's the first study of intravenous ketamine versus midazolam for individuals with methamphetamine use disorder. The eligibility criteria are pretty similar to the ADAPT-2 trial that was published in New England Journal of Medicine, except we are looking at people who have at least self-reported moderate depression severity, thinking that ketamine will lead to some improvement in depression severity, and evaluating if that could be one of the mechanisms that leads to improvement. The study design is twice weekly infusions for 3 weeks, one infusion in week 4 and one infusion in week 6. We will be enrolling 120 people, 30 participants. Mount Sinai is one of the sites here, another site in South Carolina, and a site in New Mexico. So just thinking about that, there are different challenges as we are designing this study. There is the idea of when are we expecting to see the maximum clinical improvement to occur, when are we expecting to see the treatment effect to occur. And so the primary outcome measure we settled on was similar to the ADAPT-2s, that is 3 out of 4 negative, but we focused on weeks 3 and 4. And that was because we are expecting to do most of the medication exposure early on during that time point, but we looked at a lot of other measures also. A key aspect I can talk more about is the safety aspect, that people, as we expose them to ketamine, are we going to see iatrogenic or recreational or other uses of ketamine? So week 7 onwards, we start asking them on a daily basis and daily survey, did you use ketamine today? How was your craving for ketamine? When they come back week 8 onwards, we'll actually test the urine for ketamine. So I think in terms of outcome measures, we have to keep that in mind also. But of course, we measure a lot of other things. So this is just a snapshot from the schedule of assessment. We are getting these people in a complicated study. We will be measuring EEG, so we'll have some data there. But what I wanted to talk in my last minute is this real gap in the long-term outcomes. So we were seeing people in our TMS study for 4 months, but I don't know how they were doing 6 months later, how they are doing a year later. So I was lucky to get some Brain Institute funding. So we started doing a longitudinal study of stimulant use disorder. We started last year. We have about 50 people in it now. We get people in every 3 months so that we can do EEG tasks, we can do urine sample, but we do monthly surveys where they just get a link. And I was thinking that we are not giving out cell phones, so we'll not have any monthly survey completers. our monthly survey completion rates are close to 90%. So we are getting good, maybe a small group effect so far. But finally, I think there has been a lot of interest in developing new treatments for stimulant use disorder. As Colleen said, there are no FDA-approved treatments for cocaine or methamphetamine use disorders. So as we start looking at these different contexts, different treatments, different interventions, we will have to think about outcomes similarly. So with that, I'll wrap up my presentation that there are a diverse range of outcome measures, right? I just scratched the surface with stimulant use disorder. There are other, like opioid use disorder, there would be different outcomes. We have pretty much focused on the acute phase treatment outcomes. Long-term treatment outcomes, we haven't really focused on that. And as we look at novel treatments, we may need to have novel treatment endpoints. So with that, I'll thanks my mentors, and we'll wrap up. Thank you.